Great. Thank you so much, Giselle. So once again, my name is Casey Foster. I'm the co-executive director at Partners for Dignity and Rights. And this is the first webinar in our Corporate Accountability in an Uncertain Times series. The first half of 2025 has been volatile, really all over the globe. And what we're seeing is corporate impunity on the rise. Global companies are exploiting weakened regulatory systems and political instability to silence workers and evade human rights obligations. Today, we're going to focus on the case of Fruit of the Loom, a company that once committed to upholding workers' rights, only to unravel those promises with the closure of its last two unionized factories in Honduras. These closures have affected more than 3,000 garment workers, many of whom have spent decades organizing for dignity on the job. It's important to remember that this is not just a local issue in Honduras. It's a reflection of a larger pattern of corporations retreating from hard-won labor gains under the cover of a global crisis. At Partners for Dignity and Rights, we believe that all people have the right to work with dignity, to organize freely, and to be protected from corporate abuse. Today, we're lucky to hear from labor leaders, organizers, and advocates who are demanding accountability and calling for global solidarity in these uncertain times during this crisis. We have 90 minutes scheduled for this webinar, and we know how busy everyone is, um, and we'll do our best to move to Q&A so that we can get a discussion going among our participants and those of you who are joining us. I invite everyone to put any questions you have in the Zoom question and answer box. And as we get started, I'll remind our panelists and everyone that we have two wonderful interpreters making this webinar available in both English and Spanish. So please remember to speak slowly enough for them to interpret. Being from New York, I'm going to remind myself of that instruction as we go along. Um, so we're gonna jump in and get started. And our first question is for Scott Nova, the Executive Director of the Worker Rights Consortium, or WRC, an independent labor rights organization that monitors working conditions in factories around the world. The WRC was founded in 2000 to ensure that university licensed apparel is made under fair conditions, but its impact now extends far beyond campus supply chains, and it's one of the most trusted global watchdogs on labor rights and corporate accountability in apparel production. The WRC has worked extensively in Honduras. Scott, could you tell us about the WRC's investigation at Fruit of the Loom's Jerzees de Honduras factory starting in 2008 and the eventual commitment from the company in 2009?
Yes, Casey, thanks so much. And hello, everyone. I want to just preface my comments by noting, because it's such an important point, the extraordinary progress that has been achieved in Honduras by workers and unions, particularly the CGT. There's no significant apparel exporting country in the world where the right to organize and bargain collectively is respected in practice to the degree that it is in Honduras, and where workers and unions, most importantly the CGT, have been able to bargain meaningful gains in garment factories in wages and conditions of work. And Fruit of the Loom's closure of its last unionized garment factory in Honduras is a very serious blow to that progress. And in my view, a deeply unfortunate and disappointing abdication by Fruit of the Loom of its role as an industry leader on the vital issue of associational rights. But although it is a large loss for the cause of worker rights in Honduras and a very acute loss for the workers directly affected, it will not turn back the clock on the progress workers have achieved across the industry. Tens of thousands of workers will continue to be employed in unionized garment factories owned by other companies with strong collective bargaining agreements. Freedom of association is entrenched now in the apparel industry in Honduras. It can't be dislodged. And this is thanks to the extraordinary courage and tenacity of workers and union organizers over 2 decades. Workers and unions in Honduras will go forward. They'll have to do it without Fruit of the Loom. I want to start actually a little earlier than 2008, Casey, in 2007, when a major union organizing campaign was underway at a factory in Honduras called Jerzees de Honduras, owned by Fruit of the Loom and its subsidiary, Russell Athletic. Workers were exercising their legal right in Honduras to organize a union, and Fruit of the Loom responded illegally with a variety of tactics intended to prevent workers from exercising those rights, including the illegal dismissal of numerous union leaders. I want to note something special about this particular factory, which is that it made university logo apparel. Universities impose binding labor rights requirements on the brands, like Russell Athletic in the past, to whom they grant licensing rights to make university logo clothing. And at the urging and in response to massive activism by students, most universities have those standards. And the WRC, as you noted, came into being initially to help universities enforce those standards. So because Jerzees de Honduras made university logo apparel, it was covered by these binding standards. And the WRC was in a position not just to document the illegal retaliation against the union, but to advise Russell Athletic and Fruit of the Loom that under their licensing agreements, they had to reinstate the fired workers and recognize the union, which they ultimately did in early 2008. Unfortunately, this did not last long. As the union sought to bargain a collective agreement at the factory to do its job of representing workers in grievances, Fruit of the Loom and Russell became more and more hostile to the union, and then finally decided to shut down the entire factory in order to destroy the union. This was a huge point of progress, the organization of that union, because of tremendous resistance across the industry from many companies over many years. And so in shutting down the factory, they were not just destroying that particular union, but presenting a grave challenge to the hope of genuine progress on associational rights across the industry in Honduras. But we documented at WRC through investigation that the desire to get rid of the union was a major motive for the closure of the factory. That is a violation of Honduran law. It was a violation of university codes of conduct. And we told Russell Athletic and Fruit of the Loom that they were obligated under their university licensing agreements to reopen Jerzees de Honduras, rehire the workforce, and recognize and bargain in truly good faith with the union. They refused. And indeed, they refused throughout the end of 2008 and most of 2009. But universities, at the urging of student activists, responded to the refusal of Russell and Fruit of the Loom to honor their obligations to workers under university labor codes by terminating the licensing rights of Fruit of the Loom and Russell, taking away their right to make product bearing university logos. More than 100 universities and colleges across the US and Canada did so. And finally, in response to the enormous economic pressure that represented, Fruit of the Loom came to the table and negotiated an agreement to effectively reopen Jerzees de Honduras under a new name, Jerzees Nuevo, to rehire the workers who had been illegally fired when the factory was shut down, to pay $2 million in compensation to address back pay for the period of time when the workers had been out of work. And even more importantly than those breakthroughs, the CGT at the bargaining table was also able to negotiate with Fruit of the Loom a commitment that went well beyond Jerzees de Honduras, Jerzees Nuevo, a commitment by the company to take steps that would result in genuine respect for the right to organize and bargain across all of its garment factories in Honduras, where it was at the time the largest private employer in the country. And as I'm sure Ava will discuss, the CGT and workers across the country seized this extraordinary opportunity. And they built unions at many of the Fruit of the Loom factories. And that led to successful union organizing at other major factories in Honduras owned by US brands, specifically Gildan and Hanes. And that then led to the organization of other factories, including factories owned by Honduran employers. And we saw in Honduras what we've seen nowhere else across the industry, which was a massive wave of successful union organizing and successful exercise of the right to bargain collectively, such that tens of thousands of workers in the industry came to be represented by unions and came to enjoy the protection of genuine collective bargaining agreements, including meaningful gains in wages and working conditions. That's what was achieved, most importantly, through the efforts of workers in the union. And when Fruit of the Loom made these commitments, when it reversed course, when it ended years of refusing to respect the right to organize and made these broad commitments, we understood it as an act of leadership by the company, a commitment by Fruit of the Loom that they would be a different kind of company going forward. And that is why it is so distressing to see that they no longer have a unionized garment factory in Honduras, and therefore, in my view, cannot be seen as a leader anymore on this vital issue. They've gotten a great deal of credit for what they agreed to do in Honduras, but it's impossible at this point in time um, for us to credit them as an ongoing leader on the issue in the industry because of this series of decisions culminating in the closure of Jerzees Nuevo. So, Casey, I'll stop there and turn it back to you.
That's That's a wonderful. I think first, Scott, in starting and reminding us of these breakthroughs that happened in 2009, like have seen gains across the country in the garment industry, and that those gains are still being realized by other workers in the garment industry across Honduras. I think it's good to kind of ground us there and to provide us some context, right, as we're looking forward. With that in mind, we're going to go to our next guest Teresa Haas, who's the Director of Global Strategies at Workers United. Welcome, Teresa. Also,
Thank you.
just another reminder for myself and our panelists to talk slowly. Teresa, could you share more about, apart from the documentation and company, um, sorry, could you share more about some of the actions and strategies that took place in order to achieve the breakthroughs that Scott mentioned?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cassie. Really nice to be here, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I want to build on what Scott described. As he noted, Jerzees de Honduras was a university supplier to Russell and to Fruit of the Loom, and the WRC's investigation found a number of very serious violations of university codes of conduct. But that alone, unfortunately, was not enough to persuade the company to reverse course. And when the WRC's report came out, students at campuses across the country began organizing to hold their universities accountable and demand compliance with their codes of conduct. As part of this effort, students held rallies on their campuses. They passed out flyers. They organized demonstrations. They sent out mass emails, phone calls. This was back when faxes were a thing. There were mass faxes that were being sent out. And some students even organized sit-ins in their administration's offices. Students also organized a worker tour. They brought workers from the closed plant to the United States to tour campuses and to speak about the struggle and their fight with the company. And it was largely because of this incredible student activism that went on for many, many months across the entire country and even over across the pond into the UK that students ultimately succeeded in pressuring around 100 universities to cut their ties with Russell and Fruit of the Loom. This included almost all of the Big Ten universities, as well as the entire University of California system. And this pressure was really important in the breakthrough that was ultimately achieved because Fruit of the Loom relied much more heavily on the university apparel market than some of the other major apparel brands. As students were demonstrating on campuses, they were also joining with consumer allies to organize protests and to pass out flyers at retailers such as Dick's Sporting Goods and Sports Authority that were also selling Fruit of the Loom and Russell Athletic products made in Honduras. And they urged those companies to cut ties with Russell as well. In addition, there was a shareholder strategy, which I won't go into a lot of detail about, but was, I think, equally important in terms of pushing the parent company of Russell and Fruit of the Loom which was Berkshire Hathaway. There were activist shareholders, as well as students and consumers who partnered with those shareholders to push forward a resolution and have workers from Honduras speak on the floor of one of Berkshire Hathaway's shareholder meetings, which was quite powerful. Alongside the organizing that students were doing on campuses and the work that shareholders were doing to pressure the company, fired workers in Honduras were holding protests and organizing vigils outside of the shuttered plant, calling on the company to respect the right to organize and reverse the closure. And I think ultimately it was this cross-border solidarity between students and consumers that ultimately forced Fruit of the Loom to reopen the Jerzees de Honduras plant as Jerzees Nuevo Dia. And this was the first example that I'm aware of where a factory that had been shut down to crush the union was later reopened as the result of a student worker cross-border solidarity campaign. As Scott noted, and as you'll hear from the other speakers, this was a tremendously significant breakthrough that led to numerous CBAs and significant progress in the country. Unfortunately, that progress is now being undone by Fruit of the Loom, which has now closed its last remaining unionized garment factory in Honduras, but continues to operate a non-union garment factory in the country. And I think we'll hear from some of the other speakers about the impacts that is having on workers and their families. But suffice to say that the progress that was achieved through that massive global campaign is really being walked back by Fruit of the Loom's decision to close those factories, which is obviously extremely disappointing. Thanks, Cassie.
Thanks, Teresa. And there was something you mentioned that I just want to highlight around solidarity. It's a word that we hear often, but I think what Teresa outlined is solidarity in action, right? How are the workers in Honduras and the students in the U.S. How are they exercising solidarity in action? And how are they coordinating and strategizing together so that the solidarity is effective? And we want to turn now to speak to some of the workers. So I would like to invite Evangelina Argueta, the Maquilla Project Coordinator at CGT, or Central General de Trabajadores, the Union Confederation in Honduras that has represented workers at Fruit of the Loom factories for decades. Ava, can you describe the significance of Jerzees Nuevo Dia and Fruit of the Loom's other unionized factories like Confecciones dos Caminos within the Honduran labor movement?
Bueno,
Well,
efectivamente, muchas gracias por
exactly. Thank you.
darnos esta participación a los
Thank you
hondureños que
for
estamos luchando.
opening space for
Efectivamente, como lo
us
ha dicho
Honduran
también
people who are
Teresa y
fighting,
Scott,
exactly like
en
how
Honduras ha
Teresa
sido
said.
una
In
lucha
Honduras, it's
enorme,
been a fight,
casi
a big
15
fight
años, haber
of 15
logrado
years
la
that we
libertad de sindicalización de una
succeeded
manera
the freedom of
fuerte,
association in a
decisiva.
really strong way, in a
Los
decisive
sindicatos
way.
para nosotros
The
constituidos en
unions,
la corporación Frutos del Loom es
the
una
unions
importancia,
connected to
han sido
Fruit of
como
the
los
Loom
sindicatos emblemáticos
have been an
que
emblematic
enviaron ese
unionization.
mensaje hace
They
15
sent the
años
message 15 years
de,
ago
de, de que,
that
el poder sindical, de que el
that the
poder
union
sindical
power
fuera así decisivo.
was
Ha sido
decisive.
una preocupación para nosotros
It's
el
been a
hecho
worry
de
for
que
us
esos
that
sindicatos que hace 15 años
the unions that were formed 15
tuvimos
years
esa gran
ago,
oportunidad
that were given
constituirlos,
that
de tener los contratos
opportunity to form
colectivos,
them,
de
to
que
have
enviamos un mensaje
CBAs,
de que
that we
los
sent a
trabajadores ya no tenían
message
por qué
to
tener esa
workers,
preocupación de que
that
si se
workers did not
constituían
need
en un
to worry
sindicato
if they
perdían el empleo y
if
los
they wanted to
enviaban,
form
lo
a
más
union,
grave
they
en
would lose
aquellos
their
años,
job.
los enviaban sus nombres en una
They
lista
used to send
negra
them
y esa
and put
lista
the names of of workers in a blacklist, and that blacklist impacted workers so much that they wouldn't be able to find a job after that. So the message that was sent back then, I think one of the best campaigns was this one. The message that we sent back then was a strong message, uncomfortable for those big corporations, because back then those companies acted that way, just whatever they wanted to do, they could do. For us, the importance of Dos Caminos, RLA Textile, which is still in a critical moment as we understand it. The union movement here, we see our unionization as an opening so that today 62% of this industry is unionized. It's not just that they're unionized, but we also have CBAs. And CBAs are the reason for being a union. It has been one of the most positive messages that we've been able to send out to the people. It's really sad to see the behavior that Fruit of the Loom has had in the last year, making these decisions that are quite radical. These positions, these are factories that produce a lot. 100% of those workers, who were part of that reopening of that factory and what that meant 15 years ago. Their workplace was open again. Their rights were given back to them. Their seniority was given back. I think that unions, we are in a bit of a crisis, but there are companies like Fruit who have closed these factories, and it's not quite transparent why they're doing this. It's like back to 15 years ago. They're keeping one of the factories that is not unionized open, and almost all the unionized factories are closing. And back then, they also wanted to close the one factory that was unionized. Back then, Fruit of the Loom had 12,000 direct employees. Back then, when they closed the factory, the only one that was unionized. This is why we had that campaign. We understood that that closing was not fair. And now that they're closing two, actually three factories that are unionized, this is now the worry. We're a little bit worried that these factory closing means that workers are moving to other factories or being subcontracted. The fight is, how do we send this message to the international organizations, and that Fruit of the Loom needs to understand it was a successful agreement, and we need to review how do we stop these factory closures and how do they comply with the rights of workers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ava. And I know we're here because partly we're highlighting what is a setback right now, but I also want to just highlight how much impact and progress Ava and her comrades organizing has had in Honduras when she shares a number that 62% of the workforce in the industry is unionized, and that they're winning and negotiating for CBAs, right? Like that's just an incredible number that I want to recognize. I also want to share with everyone that the chat has been sharing some resources and more background for the conversation. And those are great resources after our conversation to kind of check out to get more background and context. But now I'd like to welcome in Rocio Hernandez, who worked at Fruit of the Loom factories for 19 years and was a founding member of the Jerzees Nuevo Dia Union. Rocio, can you share your personal experience working at Jerzees Nuevo Dia, and what did union membership mean for you and your coworkers?
Buenos días, pues
Good
quiero
morning.
agradecerles
I
por
want to
la
say thank
oportunidad
you
que nos dan, ¿verdad?
for the opportunity
Gracias
to
por
be
este
here.
espacio
Thank you for the space.
y a los estudiantes
And
del
to the
SILS,
students,
al
SILS,
WRS,
and
por todo
WRC
lo que nos han apoyado.
for all the support that you've given us.
Trabajé 19 años
I
para la
worked 19
corporación Fruit of the
years
Loom.
for Fruit of
En
the
estos
Loom,
años, pues,
and in these
tener un
years,
sindicato
having a
estábamos
union
prácticamente protegidos porque
meant we
ya
were
en aquel
protected.
entonces
Back then,
no querían aceptar lo que era un sindicato.
they did not want to
Pudimos
accept the
lograr, ¿verdad?
unionization.
Por medio de la CGT,
But via
poder
CGT, we were
realizar lo
able
que era un
to
sindicato y así
realize this and
seguir
have a
adelante,
union
¿verdad?
and move forward
Sentirlos más protegidos hacia nuestros
in order to
trabajos.
feel protected while at work.
Me dieron la oportunidad de capacitarme y así
They gave me
poder
the
aprender
opportunity
y
to
poder
learn
desenvolverme en lo
and
personal y
evolve
hacer valer nuestros
personally
derechos.
and
Mi
make our
derecho
rights
hacia
real.
todos,
My
¿verdad? Y el
rights
derecho a nuestros
to
compañeros.
my rights for myself and for all of my colleagues.
Recuerdo el día que nos dieron la noticia,
I remember the
los
day that we got
estudiantes,
the announcement.
nos anunciaron el WRS
They
y
told
Jerzees
us,
Nuevo Día,
the
que
students,
nos volvieron a
WRC
dar
and Jersey Nuevo
nuestro
Dia,
y la
that they were
CGT,
going to,
¿verdad?
and
Siempre estuvo
CGT.
apoyándolos a
CGT
nosotros.
was always supporting us.
Nos dieron una gran noticia
They gave
que
us that
marcó
the big
nuestra
news
historia
that
personal hacia
marked
todos
our
nosotros.
personal history
El
and our
14
collective
de
history.
noviembre del 2009 que
November
nos iban a
14th,
regresar nuestro
2009
empleo.
is when we were
Ese
told
día
that
fue
our
histórico para cada
job
uno de
was
nosotros,
going, we were going to get our job back, and it was
hasta la
significant for
vez nos
each and
sentimos
every one of
muy,
us.
pero muy orgullosos y
Until
agradecidos con
today, we feel
ustedes
very, very
porque nos
proud
dieron en ese entonces la oportunidad
because
de
they
volver
gave
a
us the
tener un trabajo
opportunity
digno.
to have a dignified workplace.
Imagínense que
Imagine
el pasado,
last
el
year
3 de diciembre,
on
se
December
firmó lo que
3rd,
era el contrato colectivo
we signed
nuestro.
our
Era
CBA.
un cuarto contrato colectivo y ya el 9
It
de
was
diciembre
an
nos estaban
agreement,
anunciando un cierre
and
total
by
de nuestra empresa.
December 9th, they were
Eso
announcing
nosotros lo
that
tomamos
the
como una burla,
factory was going to
porque
close.
después
It
de
was a
ser
joke.
nosotros estábamos bien,
After
unas
us
nuevas
being
oportunidades, un nuevo año,
well, having the opportunity of
y nos
another year with
dijeron
our CBA,
que iban a tomar el cierre.
and then
Nos
they told us
sentimos
they were
muy
going to
entristecidos.
close the factory. It made us
Fue un impacto
really
bien fuerte
sad.
para cada uno de
It was a
nosotros,
very
¿verdad? Los 1,200
impactful
trabajadores
set of
que quedamos
news for
desempleados
each of
por
us. And
enfermedades.
now we
Fue algo
don't
bien
have an
impactante
employment.
hacia nuestras
Some
vidas.
of us have some sickness.
Y hasta la vez nos hemos sentido bien porque
And up until
prácticamente
today,
estamos desprotegidos, estamos
we
sin un
are
empleo.
unprotected.
Yo tengo una niña
Unprotected
aún
without
con 9
employment.
años que ella
I have a
necesita
9-year-old
mucho de mí.
daughter,
Y
and
hoy
she
en día,
needs me.
pues, sin tener un
And
empleo,
today,
ya es
without an
muy
employment,
difícil,
it is really
¿verdad?
hard
Decirle a ella
for me to
que ya no
tell
se
her
puede dar, ya no es
that I can't
limitado a
give
muchas
her
cosas y
what
no
she
podemos.
needs.
Entonces, estamos desprotegidos.
We're
Ya hoy en día
unprotected now.
estamos hasta con enfermedades
Today, we're getting sick.
respecto a lo que era el trabajo y todo, ¿verdad?
And
Pero
regarding the
gracias a
job
Dios, sabemos
and all
que
of
Dios
that,
es
we
fiel con
know
cada
that
uno de nosotros.
God is with us regardless of what's going on.
Y
And
las gracias por la oportunidad que nos
I
dan
want to say
cada día
thank
más,
you
¿verdad? De estar
for
aquí
this
con nosotros y
opportunity
dar
to be together
esperanzas y tocar a
and to give
aquellos.
hope
Queremos que Fruit de Loom
and
sean
to
conscientes
we want Fruit of the
hacia
Loom
nosotros y que respeten nuestro contrato colectivo.
to
Eso que nosotros tenemos
understand
todos los
and to be
empleados
aware and
de
to
Jersey Nuevo Día, Corporación de Frutas de
respect our
Loom.
CBA.
Queremos un trabajo digno,
We
nuevamente,
want
y estamos
we want a
dispuestos
dignified
a
workplace,
seguir
and we
adelante.
are ready and available to move forward.
Queremos que Fruit de Loom sea justa con cada uno de nosotros.
We want Fruit
Tener un
of the
sindicato
Loom
ha
to bring
sido una de las
justice with
mejores
each of us.
experiencias hacia nosotros.
Having a union has been one of the best experiences for each of us.
Thank you for that, Rocio, and we're gonna come back to hear more from you and Ava in a minute. But I wanted to turn to Scott here and maybe get some sight lines and insight to how does Fruit of the Loom's withdrawal from unionized Honduran garment factories reflect any broader trends in the garment industry when it comes to respecting workers' rights and engaging with independent unions?
That's a really important question, Casey. I thank you for it. And I think there are several ways in which it reflects key trends. One obvious one is that the lack of respect for the right to organize and bargain that workers and unions in Honduras have been fighting against and against which they've made genuine progress. That problem exists in virtually every apparel exporting country. You can look to the rest of Central America, to El Salvador, where there's never been a collective bargaining agreement at a garment factory. In the 30-plus year history of the industry, there are more than 200 factories. You can look at Guatemala, where such collective bargaining agreements are vanishingly rare. You can look to Asia, to Bangladesh, or to Cambodia, where any effort by workers to organize is virtually always met with legal retaliation, often involving violence. Or you can look at the two largest garment producers in the world, China and Vietnam, where independent unions are simply illegal. And you can see what workers face in the industry across the globe when they seek to exercise this right. It actually makes the gains that workers achieve truly incredible to contemplate. The courage, the tenacity, the perseverance that it takes to actually succeed. And workers do succeed in other countries as well in limited circumstances. And that speaks to another trend I want to reference. What happens when in the supply chain of a major brand or retailer that says in its own code of conduct it is committed to respecting associational rights, that goes to meetings and seminars and says it wants to see those rights respected, it encourages workers to exercise those rights? What happens in a rare case when workers actually do succeed in organizing a union in a factory in that brand or retailer's supply chain? How does then the brand or retailer over time deal with that factory? If you were truly committed to gains in this vitally important area of worker rights, you do something very obvious. You would prioritize your relationship with that one factory or small number of factories where genuine progress in advancing your own labor standards has actually been achieved. You would work closely with that factory. You would expand business with that factory. You certainly wouldn't drop it as a supplier unless there were no economic alternative to doing so. And yet we see the opposite from many brands and retailers around the world. Not only do we not see any real effort to support unionized factories, we've seen many cases in which brands and retailers have deprioritized sourcing from unionized factories, have moved away from them to cheaper sources of production. The agreement that Fruit of the Loom signed in 2009 was a departure from that, a commitment, not just in the letter of the agreement, but in the spirit of the agreement to a different kind of approach, to becoming a different kind of brand. And again, we saw that result in enormous progress achieved across the country in Honduras. And now what we see is that leadership position that Fruit of the Loom chose to adopt now being relinquished, being abdicated. Now we see Fruit of the Loom not just closing Jerzees de Nuevo Dia, but having closed every single unionized garment factory in its supply base in Honduras. How can a company that does that call itself a leader? Factories sometimes have to close. This is the reality of the garment industry. But you cannot see the last unionized garment factory closure. We've seen Fruit of the Loom as a leader for the last almost 15 years. But when a company demonstrates that it will not make an effort to prioritize keeping open a factory that is a global symbol of labor rights progress, that was the doorway for enormous gains for human dignity in Honduras, when it will not even prioritize keeping that facility open, which certainly the company has the economic wherewithal to do if it is a genuine priority, then it's impossible from my perspective to any more call that company any sort of leader on labor rights. Stop there.
Thank you, Scott. And I think I want to turn now to one of our labor leaders on the call, right? Scott is kind of pointing out that what happens when companies and corporations that see themselves as leaders actually reverse and take a step back from leading. Um, Ava, would love to hear from you as a leader who is involved. Um, how did the 2009 campaign change what's possible in the trajectory of labor rights in the Maquia sector? And what do these setbacks mean now for the work that you all are doing and how you move forward?
Ok, gracias. Bueno,
Thank you. Well,
cuando vemos la trayectoria en esos años,
when we see the
vemos,
trajectory back then, can you hear me? Yes.
yo mencionaba anteriormente que
I
hace
mentioned
15
before
años
that 15 years ago,
teníamos una situación tan crítica en el sentido que
we had a critical
no
situation
podíamos
and
sindicalizar.
we couldn't
2007,
unionize
2006 hubo una
2007,
crisis también
2006.
enorme. La
There was a
mayoría
big
de los sindicatos de
crisis
nosotros
where most of our
se nos
unions
fueron, pero aún
dissolved.
así el problema que había en Honduras, y no solo
But
Honduras, en
regardless of
toda la
that,
región
the
centroamericana,
problem
que la
in
libertad de
Honduras and all
sindicalización
of
en la industria
the Central
textil
America,
era muy
that
negativa. Era una
unionization here
crisis
was
para los
quite negative.
trabajadores sindicalizarse.
There was
Todo nuestro
a
esfuerzo
crisis
que
for
hacíamos
workers who
desde la
were trying to
CGT se nos
unionize. All the
caía,
work that we were
y lo más
doing
indignante
via
que incluso
CGT
a mí
would
me impactaba era el
fall
hecho de
apart.
que un trabajador como que
What was
lo
important to me
criminalizaban, el hecho de que pusieran su nombre
was
de la
that
lista negra, y las corporaciones se ponían de
workers were being
acuerdo
criminalized.
y
They were being
decían,
put
bueno,
in
esta persona
blacklists.
no
Companies
trabaja en
would
nuestra maquila
talk to each
porque
other
puso su
and they
sindicato
would
en otro
say,
lado.
okay, this
Entonces yo creo
worker
que
does
eso
not work in
también
our
causó
factory
mucho,
anymore because they unionized.
tocó mucho la dignidad de los trabajadores.
It
Cuando
really
hicimos
got
la
to the dignity
campaña
of
en el
workers. When
2008,
we started
y todos
the campaign in
estuvimos presentes
2008
cuando
and
firmamos
part of 2009,
nuestro acuerdo
when we
que se
signed
firmó hace
the
16
agreement
años, fue
almost
el
16
14 de
years ago,
noviembre de 2009. El
November
mensaje
14,
que se dio a
2009,
Honduras fue un
the
mensaje:
message that was
basta ya,
sent all
aquí no
over
hay abusos a
Honduras
la libertad de
was
sindicalización.
no more abuses,
Eh,
no more
Porque
abuses
fue
for trying
impactante
to
el hecho
unionize.
que ni en un
It was
tribunal de
impactful.
trabajo
There
se
wasn't one
pudo
tribunal,
lograr
one
el que
court
1.200 trabajadores de una
that
maquila reabrieran esa
1,200
fábrica,
workers from one
su
factory
sindicato
would reopen.
nuevamente
It was
vuelva y
unprecedented.
negocia un contrato colectivo.
And so we
Ese es el
come back
mensaje
and we
más
got to
positivo en materia
unionize
laboral en
and
Honduras.
get a
Y entonces,
collective
¿cuál fue el
bargaining
mensaje para
agreement.
el
That
resto
was
de
the
las
message.
corporaciones? Era
The
que
message
no
to the
podían
rest of
seguir
the
jugando con los
companies
derechos
was
de
that
los
they
trabajadores,
couldn't keep
no
playing with
podían
our
seguir
rights.
abusando, y
They
a partir de
couldn't
ese año
keep
2009,
abusing our rights.
2010, nuestro trabajo ha
And
sido
since
constante,
2009 and
permanente, en
2010,
organizar,
our
organizar
work
las
has
denuncias y
continued
vigilar el
to
cumplimiento de
be
los derechos
organizing, make sure the CBAs are being respected. We moved forward. We started to look for targets to unionize in other places. And Fruit of the Loom was the first one who signed that agreement that we call the Washington Agreement. It was a successful agreement. It sent the message to the entire industry, the textile industry in Honduras, that they were not going to be able to stop the unions. And since then, we saw that our union grew. Today, there are 33 union organizations. CGT has 28 unionized organizations. And almost 100% have a CBA, but one of them does not. And it's not a factory, a textile factory, but they don't want to negotiate. It has been one of the biggest successes in the entire country. Textile factories have 150,000 direct employments of workers here. So the other unionizations or the other unions were also able to move forward. A lot of organizations in the US have also supported us. The investigations via WRC has supported us. The solidarity organizations that have always helped us. But we also did another, and we denounced NAFTA, and we denounced that these companies were violating the rights of unions back then. Today we can say that Honduras has holds the space for dialogue. We negotiate the salary for the entire industry. The unions negotiate directly with the representatives of the companies and the government. The campaign that lasted 1 year, sometimes we were in fear that the campaign, we wouldn't win the campaign. And today, students are continuing to support us. We remain hopeful via their activism. We know they're young, we know they're students, but we are proud of them. They have our rights and interests in their hearts. They understand how we fight, what we're suffering. It's a great example of solidarity. So that message from back then in 2009 became a success in Honduras. And I'm saying not only in Honduras, but the entire Central American industry. The fights that Salvadorian comrades and Nicaraguan comrades are fighting today. The unionization of Honduras is so strong that it was really impactful when they announced the closure of the factories. The quality of our work is high quality work. The location of Honduras so that the product arrives on time in the US. We cannot understand. We don't understand the logic why Fruit of the Loom today is closing our factories, despite its success. And despite the success that we still have, the Washington Accord was saved and it liberated the union movement in Honduras. to see that they're leaving us with only one factory that's unionized, it's a huge drawback. They're sending a message to all of the worker movement and social movement. We believe that he could keep working here. They can't pretend and evade that workers have good conditions. There was a studio by Professor Mark Anner that talked about the conditions of workers, both the ones that are in a union and the ones that are not in a union. Workers participated directly. They said they felt secure. They said they had benefits when they were in a union. If they weren't in a union, they had precarious jobs. So that research that Mark Anner did, it helped us feel satisfied that the fight that we've had in Honduras has not been in vain. So we defend the accord, and today we want to tell the international community, come with us, partner with us. We believe that the companies can invest wherever they want, and they've decided to close these, but they have a contractual obligation. If they signed a CBA and then the next week they close the factory, it's a joke. It's a bad message that they're sending. And they still can't, they do not want to commit to what they signed then. It is, they should respect the CBA. The economic payments that were promised in that CBA. We're calling the international industry. We practice negotiating with industries. We've been doing that since I've been part of the union. So in the summary, that agreement that was signed in 2009 and all the work that was done with international organizations sent a message to other companies. Today we have the liberty, the freedom of association, and a really strong unionization power here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ava. And part what I heard from you and Rocio is that these closings are going to have real life impacts on people that are going to affect workers and their families. But I also heard that the work and organizing that you've been doing has transformed conditions for thousands of workers, not just in Honduras, but in El Salvador and other countries, and that you're going to continue fighting for the workers in these factories and for other workers, and that part of what has been helped to build power to fight have been the relationships with some of the organizations that are on the call here. But you also specifically mentioned the support of students. And so I wanted to welcome Giselle Cervantes into the conversation. This is our last question before we'll open it up for Q&A to hear from people who have joined us. But Giselle, who's the national organizer for Students for International Labor and Solidarity, would love to hear from you, your understanding now. How did student activism play a pivotal role in the 2009 victory? And I know you weren't there at the time, but could you also talk about what today's generation is learning from that legacy and how to build on it moving forward?
Absolutely. Thank you, Casey. Hi, everyone. My name is Giselle Cervantes. I'm a national organizer with Students for International Labor Solidarity, or SILS for short. And we're an organization of students in the United States committed to organizing in solidarity with workers internationally, with a key focus on solidarity with garment workers. As we heard from Scott and Ava, we know that this 2009 victory had a major impact, not just on the workers who used to work at Jerzees de Honduras, but on the garment industry as a whole. And it has had a similar impact on the anti-sweatshop student movement, as we consistently reference this victory when strategizing for campaigns we are working on today. And a key thing that the 2009 victory taught us is that it is possible to leverage university codes of conduct to support workers organizing and force brands to come to the table and negotiate. And this victory not only taught us about effective campaign strategy, but it also taught us that as long as garment workers are organizing on the ground, students have a responsibility to organize in solidarity on their campuses, because when we come together, when students and workers and key labor allies come together, we know that we can win. Since Fruit of the Loom has left the collegiate licensing space, students have gotten creative with their campaign strategy to find Fruit of the Loom wherever they are and demand that Fruit of the Loom stop the closures of Jerzees, Nuevo and Confecciones dos Caminos. When Fruit of the Loom was present at an event in Washington, D.C. in February, being celebrated for their commitment to labor rights, students were right outside, demanding that they stop the closure of Jerzees Nuevo and Confecciones dos Caminos, as well as calling attention to the brand's blatant union busting in violation of labor rights. Students have also been campaigning digitally, using social media to apply pressure and raise awareness about this case, using informational videos, memes, flooding Fruit of the Loom's comment sections, and SILS even created a campaign website that you can visit. It's called rottenfruitoftheloom.com. And we're using these spaces to amplify workers' demands, share photos of workers who are organizing on the ground, and to call out Fruit of the Loom's labor rights violations. SILS was also a part of a sign-on letter to retailers that included nearly 30 major allies, including Unifor, Human Rights Resource Center, Jobs with Justice, and the Center for Popular Democracy. And we know that this fight isn't over. Students involved in SILS are currently planning a delegation to Honduras in August to meet with former Fruit of the Loom workers and to strategize with CGT to continue escalating our campaign to demand the reopening of the unionized garment factories in Honduras. We know that we have a lot to learn from the incredible organizers in CGT, and SILS is committed to continuing to organize in solidarity with the workers from Jerzees and Confecciones dos Caminos.
Thank you for that, Giselle. So we are going to open it up to Q&A from the attendees. And this first question is going to be for Teresa. Can a line be drawn between what is happening in Honduras and NEC's closure of its own unionized factory in Sri Lanka? Are there fears that this is part of a larger trend? And what does that mean in light of the ITUC's latest report, which saw a sharp escalation in violations of fundamental labor rights, including access to collective bargaining?
Thanks, Cassie, and thanks, Jasmine. I think it's a really important question, and I appreciate you also raising this issue of the closure by Next of the unionized factory in Sri Lanka. I think there is a really important parallel to draw here, and I would actually take us back to what Scott was saying about the obligations that brands have when factories do ultimately form union, allow workers to form unions and sign CBAs. It takes a tremendous amount of bravery and effort and time and commitment by workers across the garment industry to form unions anywhere in the world. And they have to overcome tremendous odds to be able to do that successfully. And they have to mount real campaigns to get to a point where their union is recognized, and even more to get to a point where they're able to successfully negotiate a collective bargaining agreement with the company for rights and benefits that go beyond the law. And so when workers are in the very rare instance able to do that and succeed in making those gains, it is incumbent upon the brands and retailers that either own or source from those factories to do absolutely everything in their power to ensure that those factories stay open. And I think the fact that Fruit of the Loom did not do that here in Honduras, that Next did not do that in Sri Lanka, is incredibly problematic and reflects a lack of commitment by those brands to meaningfully implementing their own codes of conduct. And so I think there is a very stark parallel to draw here, and I think that's a really good point. And to the broader question about what does this mean in terms of the ITUC's latest reporting, in terms of the sharp escalation, in terms of violations of fundamental labor rights, I think that ties back to the theme of this entire webinar, which is about corporate accountability and what that looks like going forward under the current political regime that we have here in the United States and more broadly in the global economy. Thanks.
Thank you, Teresa. Our second question is, how has how have the economic situations of the workers and their families from the factories been affected? And how are they dealing with this crisis within their families? And this would be either for Rocio or Ava.
Es un impacto negativo hacia nuestras vidas.
It's been a
Hemos
negative impact in our
hemos
lives.
sentido,
We've
al
been
no tener un
feeling
empleo, pues nos
that now that
limitamos
we
muchas
don't have a
cosas,
job,
tanto hacia nuestras
we
familias, ¿verdad?
are
Es
limited,
muy,
limited
es
to
muy
what we can
difícil
provide to our families.
estar sin un empleo,
It's
¿verdad?
it's really
Y
difficult to be
tener
without a
familia,
job
que nos dicen,
and to
deme
have a
más de esto, y
family.
nos limitamos a muchas
Like
cosas.
my daughter who says,
Es
"Can you
bien
give me
difícil lo que
this?
estamos
Can we have
pasando
that?"
todos
And we
nosotros los
have to
empleados
be
de
limited in our
Jerzees,
spending.
Nuevo y Fruit de Loom.
It's
Y
really
más a nuestra
difficult
edad, ¿verdad? Que
for
hemos
all of
dado
the
todo
workers
por el
from
todo
Jersey,
por
Nuevo,
nuestra empresa.
especially at our age,
19 años
and
que
we've
estuvimos
given
presentes,
everything to this
ellos han sido
company.
bien, fue
19
una
years that
empresa
we've been
bien
committed to this
rentable,
job.
productiva, y hoy en día
It was a
pues hemos
productive
quedado
company
sin un
and
empleo.
factory, and now we don't have a job.
Tenemos un ejemplo, ¿verdad?
We
Dos
have an
con nuestros
example, well,
compañeros y
actually
ayuda de
two,
ellos.
with our
Le ha
colleagues.
pegado un infarto, pues ha
One
quedado
of them had a
postrada
heart
de tanta
attack,
depresión, ¿verdad? Porque
and now they
ya
can't
es muy
do
difícil
anything.
para
They're
ella,
quite
¿verdad?
depressed. It's
Ya
really
el seguro
difficult for
social,
her.
pues ya no tiene ni seguro social,
She
porque
doesn't have Social Security anymore.
ya al no trabajar, pues solo 2 meses
Since
le dan
she's
a los
not working,
compañeros y ya ella está pasando un proceso.
she
Le
only
pegó un
got 2
infarto y está
months of
postrada ya
support.
prácticamente en abandono, porque al no
She
tener
had a
seguro
heart
social
attack and
y
now
al no
she's
tener un
just
empleo,
basically
pues nos
abandoned.
limitamos a
Now
muchísimas
that she
cosas.
doesn't have Social Security or an employment, she is quite limited in what she can do.
Es bien limitante. Hemos quedado en
It's been
depresión. Hay compañeros que
really
es bien
limiting and
triste lo que estamos
difficult.
pasando
A lot of
nosotros,
us are
¿verdad?
depressed
Que hoy en día quedamos
with what we're
sin
suffering and
con
what we're having to
sin
live through
desempleo y sin seguro social.
without a
Es
job,
bien
without
difícil.
Social Security.
Lo que fue
It's
la
really, really
directiva,
difficult.
pues se quiso negociar con la empresa, ¿verdad? Que nos dieran un año de indemnización. Pues
They
ellos solo aceptaron
negotiated with
3
us and
meses.
we tried
Y 3
to
meses
get
en este
1
tiempo,
year
pues,
of pay, but they gave us 3 months
¿verdad?
only.
Fue bien difícil lo que estamos pasando nosotros.
It's quite hard what we're going through right now.
Thank you, Rocio. This question is to just build off where Rocio just left us in terms of negotiations, and this could be for Ava. Rocio mentioned dialogue and negotiations with Fruit of the Loom as a result of the campaign. Where are you in talks now, and how do you see those talks progressing?
Ok. Eh, en realidad, cuando la empresa anunció el cierre a
When
los
the
sindicatos,
company announced the closing of the factories to the
en
unions,
principio resistimos y dijimos no,
at
es
first
un
we
cierre
resisted.
inaceptable. Sin
We
embargo,
did not accept
hemos
the
visto
closure of the
con el paso del
factories,
tiempo, Frutos del Loom
but with
está
time,
tranquilo, relajado,
Fruit of the
porque
Loom is
las organizaciones
relaxed,
sindicales no eran representativos, costó
as if the
mucho
unions do not
iniciar un
represent
diálogo.
the
El sindicato
workers.
presentó
It was
una
really
petición
hard to start a
para
dialogue with them.
que
The
le diera
union presented a
cumplimiento a todo lo que había
petition
firmado.
to
El
Fruit of the
sindicato
Loom
hizo
to
las
comply with what
peticiones del
they'd
contrato
signed.
colectivo en su totalidad, que lo debe de cumplir, que
The union
estén
asked
claros
for
en
them
eso.
to comply with
Luego
the
el
CBA
sindicato
that they had
pidió
just signed.
también que hubiera
The union
indemnizaciones. Ya
asked
una
for
ocasión lo logramos.
compensation.
Frutos del Loom
We had won a
que
compensation
indemnizar al
battle
trabajador
before.
por un cierre y
The
la empresa no ha
compensation
resistido. La empresa ha
awarded to
dicho no,
workers that they
no
deserved for
hay
closing the factory.
beneficio, no vamos a
And
cumplir.
the company has
Hablamos en un
said there is
principio
no
de algunas
compensation
cláusulas
and
que
we're
se
not going to
negociaron
comply
sobre
with the
el mes de
CBA.
diciembre, unos
And there were
días
some
adicionales de vacaciones que se
pieces
lograron
that they were
negociar, dijo
supposed to
que no lo va a
comply with
cumplir.
in December, such as
Entonces,
some vacation days, and they said, no, we're
increíble,
not going to
16
comply.
años los
It
trabajadores
is
generándole riqueza a la
unbelievable
corporación.
that for
No es
16
posible que
years
hoy
we've
que se
been the
dice vamos a
ones
cerrar, no le
producing
cumplan a
what
los
makes them
trabajadores.
rich, and
En
they
la
will
mesa
not
de diálogo
comply
finalmente
and
se
commit
logró
to
un
what the workers
documento
deserve.
donde las
In the
posiciones quedaron claras.
negotiation
El
table, there was a
sindicato,
document that was
el
signed.
sindicato mantiene sus posiciones, los dos
The
sindicatos,
union
Unionized de Jerzees Nuevo
remains
Día y Confecciones Dos Caminos.
with our
En
position
esas dos empresas
in
hay
those two
afectados alrededor
factories.
de 3.500 trabajadores.
There's about
eh,
3,500
y
workers
dijimos
impacted by the closure.
pues que el sindicato exige,
And we
está
said
haciendo su
that
lucha.
the union is requesting
Constituimos una comisión inclusive de seguimiento. No hemos podido tener nuevamente
we
otra reunión después
organize
de
the
2 meses, cosa
commission to give
que
follow-up
cerró
to
bajo
this
la cortina de esa
situation.
empresa y cree que no
Fruit
tiene
of the
más
Loom
responsabilidad.
closed the curtain and
Eso
said we are no
de la
longer
lucha la vamos a
responsible
seguir.
for any of
Nosotros
this. I
estamos
think we're going to
preparándonos,
continue to fight.
estamos
We're
acostumbrados a este
preparing
tipo de
ourselves.
peleas, de lucha.
We're
Y
used
más
to
bien
this kind of
agradezco a
fights,
los organizadores
unfortunately.
internacionales que nos están
And
acompañando,
I do want to say thank
organizaciones
you
que nos
to
están
the
presentes
international
porque conocen
organizations
el
that are
trabajo
supporting us
honesto y
because they
transparente que los
know
sindicatos en
our
Honduras
work.
hacemos.
They know that our work is honest.
Está como en el comité de supervisión ha habido algunas
In
pláticas,
the supervising committee,
avances
there's been some
de
conversations,
conversar, pero no vemos
some slow
finalmente de frente
movement
abierta
to
a
have a
decir vamos
conversation, but I
a
do
buscarle
not see Fruit
soluciones
of
a
the
esta.
Loom being
Entonces,
open
ahí
to
estamos,
finding a
así está en este
solution to this
momento la
problem.
negociación.
That is where we are right
Están los
now in the
trabajadores en una
negotiating
situación
table.
crítica, como Rocío
Workers are in a
mencionó, con
critical
un tema de salud
situation,
grave.
like
Ustedes saben
Rocio
que
was
una
saying.
persona, después del ejemplo de
As
Rocío,
as you might
después de tener
understand, the
19 años
example
o
that Rocio is
23 años
saying,
de estar
after
laborando
16
y bueno,
years of
mucha gente
working,
quedó bien.
their
Las
health
enfermedades
is not great.
musculoesqueléticas en la industria de la maquila son altísimas.
The
El contrato colectivo
musculoskeletal
habla de
issues that
6
they
meses de
have,
salario, pero 3 meses de salario, ¿qué
they have
son?
talked about
Están
3 months of
para un
compensation,
trabajador,
but
pues
what is 3 months
son
for a worker?
ni siquiera $1,500.
It's not
Entonces,
even
el
$1,500.
sindicato está pidiendo que se indemnice a las
The
trabajadoras
union is
afectadas.
asking
No quiso dar
for
prestación de seguro
compensation for
social a los
workers.
trabajadores más de 2 meses que ya la ley
They did
lo
not
requiere cuando
give
un
more than
trabajador tiene
2 months
desempleo.
of Social
Los trabajadores
Security.
están viéndose en una enorme
So
dificultad
workers
a hacer sus trámites
are
en las instituciones de salud.
facing
Están
really
desprotegidos los
difficult
trabajadores, no están
challenges
bien.
in
Trabajadores que han
accessing
caído
health
totalmente en
services.
crisis. El ejemplo que ponía la compañera, hay una
Workers are in
compañera que le han
crisis, such
pegado
as what
2 derrames.
Rocio has said.
Porque, o sea, el que nos avisen 6 meses antes, mire, ya no tienen empleo.
To say
No es fácil.
6 months
No es fácil guardar un
before
empleo cuando
you
uno
won't
está
have
en
a job
condiciones
is not easy,
buenas, en una estabilidad, que
especially a
ahora las
job that
familias
brought
prefieren sus hijos en las
stability and good
escuelas, cómo
conditions
están
to a family.
atendiendo.
what are mothers going to do when their kids are at school? Rocio said this, but some companies do not want to give workers from the Jerzees factory a job. We're denouncing this because it's unacceptable at this point that there could be retaliation of workers who worked at these factories. We need to continue demonstrate the violations of the rights of workers. That is where we are in the negotiations.
Thank you. Please jump in. Yeah, Teresa, absolutely.
Thanks. Thanks, Cassie. And yeah, I just want to follow up on what Ava was saying with 2 points. One piece I want to mention, Ava flagged this, but I want to just highlight it because I think it's really important. Fruit of the Loom, at the same time that they were getting ready to close Jerzees Nuevo Dia, Fruit of the Loom was also in the process of negotiating a 3-year collective bargaining agreement with the CGT. And in fact, concluded those negotiations the same week that they ultimately announced the closure of Jerzees Nuevo Dia. And in our view, it is extremely bad faith for the company to be simultaneously sitting down and negotiating a 3-year agreement with the union when they know full well that they are about to turn around and shut down that factory. They never said to the union, your jobs are on the line here. They never offered the opportunity for the union to negotiate over concessions or changes that might offer the opportunity to keep the factory open. They left the union and the workers completely in the dark. And in our view, in my view, that is a violation of the commitments that Fruit of the Loom made in the 2009 Washington Agreement. And the other point I want to make here is Fruit of the Loom has claimed that the closures of Jerzees Nuevo Dia and of Dos Caminos are necessary because of the financial situation that the company was in. But I think it's important to understand that at the time that Fruit of the Loom agreed to reopen Jerzees de Honduras back in 2009, the company and the entire global economy was coming out of the most severe and economic financial situation since the Great Depression. We were coming out of the Great Recession, which lasted from 2007 to partway through 2009. And so it is very difficult to understand how Fruit of the Loom at that time could reopen this facility and is now claiming that it can no longer afford to keep this unionized facility open due to financial reasons.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarity, Teresa. Our next question is for Giselle. And I'm going to reframe it a little bit because it is about how student organizing and actions contribute to tangible wins. And I think Teresa at the top of the our webinar helped to kind of explain how student organizing here on campuses collectively with the workers where they are is a strategy that leads to tangible wins. But Giselle, maybe you can kind of share like your perspective and Sil's perspective is how are the actions, how is Sil's organizing contributing to wins, both in the case originally here, but also with other workers across the globe.
Absolutely. Students have power in the global garment industry, and we know this because of the history of anti-sweatshop student activism and students using the relationships that universities have with brands to hold brands accountable when they violate the labor rights of garment workers abroad. And we have used this 2009 victory and I know Scott mentioned there were 100 universities who cut their contracts in 2009 when students were campaigning for Fruit of the Loom and Russell to respect the labor rights of their garment workers. We have used this model on other campaigns that we're working on. Most recently, a campaign against Nike. We have been pushing for contract cuts at universities where there is a relationship between the university and Nike, because we know that students have these binding codes of conducts that are embedded in their licensing agreements with brands that state that universities have an obligation to the workers in their international supply chain. And what is tricky about this case is that because Fruit of the Loom is no longer a university licensee, we can't use that same leverage of university contract cuts that we did back in 2009. So we have really tried to push for other ways of building power. We know that brands care about what university students in the US think about their image and their brand. And so we have used this by creating digital content that shows the students care about this case and students care about the workers who produce garments for Fruit of the Loom.
Thanks, Giselle. And I think earlier in the webinar, you mentioned showing up where Fruit of the Loom is, right? Like organizers here, where these corporations are headquartered, right? Like we have an obligation, right, to bring the demands of the workers directly to the corporations that are here. I want to go to our last question today. I want to ask Rocio and her coworkers, what message would you want people here in the US, but also globally, to understand about your situation?
De los estudiantes y la
I want
WRS
students
nos apoyen.
and WRC to continue supporting us.
Perdón,
Sorry.
que nos apoyen y que hacerle ver a la
To
corporación
keep
Fruit of the
supporting
Loom que
us
respete nuestro contrato
and
colectivo.
to tell Fruit of the Loom to respect our CBA.
Y muchas gracias, ¿verdad? Nuevamente,
And
porque han
thank you
estado
again
pendientes hacia a
because
nuestros problemas que estamos pasando aquí.
they've been
No ha sido
concerned with the
fácil.
issues that
Hasta
we're
la vez,
facing.
pues
It
uno
has not been
se pone
easy.
malito, ¿verdad? El proceso que estamos pasando y darle
Sometimes
las
we feel
gracias a
bad
ustedes por
about
este
the
espacio, ¿verdad?
situation we're
Y
in
Dios
and want to
primero
say thank you
que
for this
hayan
space.
respuestas positivas para cada uno
And
de nosotros
hopefully there will
desde
be
aquí,
positive
desde Honduras,
resolutions
¿verdad?
for each
Y
of
haga
us in
valer
Honduras.
y respeten nuestro contrato colectivo, ¿verdad?
And for Fruit of the Loom to respect our collective bargaining agreement.
Thank you for that, Rocio. And thank you so much for spending your time with us today. As you shared, how challenging times are right now. So we really appreciate having your time to speak with us today. Before we close or wrap up, I just want to open up the space to see if any of our other guest panelists have anything else they want to say before we close out. No. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Casey. I see we have a raised hand in the audience. Raina, I'm gonna press allow to talk if you want to ask your question out loud.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
De aquí, un ganchito. Así, solo que no puedo ver acá
I
la
can't-
cámara. Buenos días.
I can't see the camera, but good morning.
Buenos días. ¿verdad? Me disculpo por no estar
Sorry for
el inicio de la reunión, ya que tenía
not being at the beginning of this meeting.
de internet,
There
¿verdad?
was an
No
internet
pude
problem.
ver todo el tema que se ha tocado, pero sí estoy al tanto, ¿verdad?
I've been up
todo
to
el
date in
proceso
what
que se ha
happened in this
venido
conversation
haciendo los
and the
compañeros
process
estudiantes y
that
tener, pues,
and
mil
solidarity
gracias, ¿verdad? A
that
todo ese
work
equipo,
that students
junto con
have
Teresa, a todos ustedes,
supported us through
por
this
esa gran
fight.
labor y
So I want to
esa,
say thank you
¿verdad?
to the
Ese gran
students and to
apoyo
Teresa
que nos
for
están
that
dando
great
desde allá
support
para nosotros aquí,
that
los
you all are
trabajadores en
giving us
Honduras.
from far away to
Yo
all the
soy la
workers here in
presidenta
Honduras.
del sindicato de
I'm
Confecciones
the
Dos Caminos.
Union
Y
Dos
la verdad nos
Caminos
sentimos muy agradecidos
president, and we feel really
¿verdad? De esta
grateful
lucha y
for
decimos
this
pues
fight. And just
como
wanted to
nosotros siempre
say
lo manejamos y creemos que es
that
así, ¿verdad? De que
the
la
way that
empresa,
we believe
la
it is
corporación Loom
that
se ha
the
vuelto
company Fruit of the Loom
antisindicalista, ¿verdad?
has turned
Las
anti-union.
decisiones que se
The
tomaron pues son
decisions they've
antisindicales
made
y eso
are
igual nosotros, ¿verdad?
anti-union.
Sí lo sabemos.
We know this.
Y pues nosotros aquí estamos, ¿verdad? Más que todo dispuestos
We are here.
a
We are
colaborar, ¿verdad?
ready
Igual
to
con la base
collaborate.
a cualquier llamado y también,
We are
¿verdad?
ready to support our
Creo que
base
exigiendo también lo del contrato colectivo que
and to
nosotros pues
demand
dejamos
that our
un segundo
CBA
contrato colectivo
be honored.
sin negociar, ¿verdad? Solo con 4 cláusulas y que lo
We
demás pues
we left the
viendo
CBA
de
with only
cómo
4 clauses
evitar un
without
cierre,
negotiating much.
nos entregamos todo un contrato colectivo, ¿verdad? De que no
We
lo negociamos,
delivered an entire
pero
CBA
en este
without
momento pues
negotiations.
si hay esa gran oportunidad de la lucha,
There is that opportunity
creo que
right
sí,
now.
¿verdad? Los
I think
trabajadores
there is.
nos merecemos y como bien
We as
decía
workers
Evangelina,
deserve
¿verdad?
the way that
Nosotros
Evangelina was
en
saying.
Confecciones Dos Caminos teníamos una
At
empresa
the Confecciones
de
Dos
30
Caminos
años de
factory,
elaborar. Había una
we
cantidad
had a factory
de
of 30
mujeres, más que
years.
todo, ¿verdad?
There were a
Mujeres
lot of
con
women
daños, donde difícilmente, ¿verdad?
where
Con unas prestaciones que ellos se lleven, nunca van a recuperar
where
lo que
it
son
would
los
be
daños
really hard
que
for them.
estas empresas ocasionan, ¿verdad? En los movimientos
It
de
would be really hard for them to
y
come
sí,
back from
¿verdad?
this closure with the
Reconociendo
little
que
compensation that they're getting from
nuestros
the factory
compañeros,
closure.
¿verdad? Los estudiantes desde un inicio,
And
¿verdad?
just
Creo que
recognizing that
fue
the students
al
from the
siguiente
beginning,
día, después del
I
anuncio que
think
nosotros nos
the
anunciaron,
day
el
after
cierre del 29
the
de
news that were
mayo,
given to
ellos
us,
han estado
they've been
en contacto, ¿verdad? Y
in contact with
agradecer mucho
us
también, ¿verdad?
and supporting
A
us. And I just want
Evangelina,
to say thank you again.
que
And
ha
also to
estado a pie de
Evangelina,
lucha, pues, y la conocemos
just
y
always fighting
creemos,
at the
¿verdad? Que
forefront
su
of this
trabajo,
fight.
pues,
We know
ya
it's
se ha visto desde muy antes y, y creo que con el apoyo de todos nosotros, pues, vamos
with the support
seguir
of all of
hasta
us and all of
donde
you, we will
se pueda,
continue,
¿verdad?
continue
Estamos
until
aquí
we can't.
para seguir en la lucha. No
And we are
estamos, como
here
dicen,
to stay in the fight.
Trabajando, pero nosotros
We're
seguimos
not
como
working
líderes
right
sindicales,
now, but we
seguimos,
are
¿verdad?
still
Porque
leaders of the
creo que
union
la lucha de un sindicalista, eso es, pues, a ver los
because
resultados, ¿verdad?
the fight of
Estamos
a union member is to continue fighting
para
until we
seguir.
get
Y no sé
results.
si habían algunas preguntas para
And we are
Confecciones Dos
here
Caminos,
to
porque la verdad
continue.
no
And
pudimos
if there are
estar
any questions
al inicio
for
de la
the Confección
reunión.
Dos Caminos factory, I'm open to answering those questions and
Solamente
sorry about
gracias.
not joining before. That's all.
Thank you, Raina. No need to apologize. We appreciate you being able to join us now. So I want to once again, I want to thank all of our panelists, Ava, Rocio, Teresa, Scott, Giselle, for sharing your experiences, and to all of you for joining us today. This discussion is one part of a growing global movement to shift from voluntary promises to binding commitments that prioritize human dignity. As we've heard today, meaningful change doesn't come from corporate pledges. It comes from workers organizing, allies demanding accountability, and systems that enforce real consequences. We encourage everyone to stay engaged, to amplify the demands of Jerzees Nuevo and Confecciones dos Caminos workers, and to call out Fruit of the Loom when it paints itself as a brand that supports freedom of association. I also invite you to carry this momentum forward. Join us for our next in this webinar series. We're publishing a report, Checking Boxes, Cheating Workers, How Social Audit Firms Are Complicit in Labor Rights Abuses on Tuesday, the 17th of June. We'll send out more information for everyone who joined this call to be able to join the next webinar. There's been a lot of research and case studies showing how social auditing industry fails to detect abuses in workplaces around the globe. This report goes further, examining 3 case studies in which these social auditing firms aren't just failing to uncover abuses, but are actively helping corporations dodge accountability. It is a timely and critical conversation right now as we see the US defunding government support for human and labor rights around the globe and a wave of corporate impunity rippling around the world. I hope you can join us for that. Check your inbox soon for information on the webinar to come on the second week of July. And lastly, I would encourage everyone to follow SILS and P4DR for more information about the Fruit of the Loom case. And to close us out, I'm going to pass it to Ava.
Bueno, yo creo que ya como ya estamos finalizando,
I think since we're wrapping up,
una pregunta que escuché se le hizo a
there's a
Rosy
question
y
that I
nosotros
saw,
como CGT también y con el resto de las
and
organizaciones
as
sindicales,
CGT and
igual
with the rest
tenemos
of
en
the
nuestra
unions,
estrategia este
we
caso
have in
de
our
Jerzees porque no
strategy
podemos
this
dejar que
case.
este mal
We
ejemplo
cannot
se dé.
allow that this example
Para nosotros las organizaciones
become a
a nivel
reality.
de los Estados Unidos y a nivel de Europa y
For
otros
us,
países,
the US and
organizaciones que
European
tenemos una alianza
organizations
estratégica muy buena de muchos años
that we have
a nivel mundial,
relationships with
cómo las organizaciones entonces
globally, how
nosotros
do these
pensamos
organizations
que
can
pueden
help us?
entender y cómo analizar y cómo
How
entender esta
can
situación.
they
Nosotros
understand the
seguimos
situation
en la
we are
lucha,
in?
seguimos en la
We
pelea.
remain in
Tal
the
vez
fight.
pues hay algunas organizaciones que en aquellos años fueron un soporte enorme para nosotros.
Perhaps some organizations supported us
Algunas
back
todavía
then.
están así como observando, pero hay
Some are still
organizaciones
looking at
ya
the
que nos han mostrado
situation.
la solidaridad, ya nos han
Some other
apoyado
organizations have
y queremos decirles hoy
shown
que
us their
para nosotros,
solidarity.
para el
And I
mensaje
want to say
que
that
debe
for
quedar
us, the message
estas
that I want to leave you
corporaciones
with is
no
that
deben de continuar en esos incumplimientos, en esas
companies cannot
impunidades.
continue to
Necesitamos hoy
remain
enviar un mensaje
immune
de que
to
después de tener
violating
un
these
éxito,
agreements.
después de tener esos enormes
A-
avances, después de
After
tener
such
contratos colectivos en en
success,
las en los
after
sindicatos,
all of the
esos líderes
CBAs
y esas
that
mujeres
were
empoderadas, queremos
made a
decirles que esta
reality and all the
corporación
empowerment of women that
finalmente, si al
came
final
from
usted
these
terminó
CBAs.
cerrar, cumpla
And
con lo
at
que
the end
dijo.
of the day,
No es serio,
if you
como
close the
bien lo decía la
factory,
compañera Teresa, no es
please,
serio de una
please commit to the
corporación
CBAs
que
you
firma un
signed.
contrato colectivo que
They're
estuvieron en una
not being
negociación
serious, they're not being
muchos
real.
meses
For
y en
like
ningún
Teresa was
momento
saying,
mencionó en la mesa de negociación
that
que
they
había
never
posibilidad de que lo
mentioned at the
cierre.
negotiating table
Firmamos el
that they
contrato
might
colectivo y la
close
siguiente
the
semana nos dice
factories.
cierra.
We signed that
Eso no es
CBA,
serio
and the next
de
week
una
they
corporación.
closed the
Entonces
factories.
tenemos que
That
hacer
means
que
they were not
respete,
taking us
que
serious.
cumpla con los
We
derechos de los
want to
trabajadores. Por
demand
eso
for them
pido
to respect
a
us,
las
to make
organizaciones
the rights of workers
internacionales,
real.
ayúdennos.
And
Solo
we
con
want to
esa
ask all the
con
international
esa
organizations to
alianza
help us,
estratégica
to
es que hemos
support us.
podido el
It
movimiento
is
feminista
only with these
beneficiarnos
strategic alliances that
porque
we've
los
been
derechos de los
able
trabajadores
to succeed.
no son negociables.
The
Son
rights of
negociables
workers
para
are not
beneficio de los
negotiables.
trabajadores, para bien de los trabajadores,
They're
para
only negotiable
dignamente.
in
Pero
the
los
benefit
derechos de
of
los trabajadores
workers,
no
in the
pueden
benefit
negociarse.
of their
Entonces,
protections.
pido a estas organizaciones internacionales
I
que den la
ask
solidaridad
all the international organizations here for solidarity because CGT will continue this fight. Unions are strong, remain strong, such as Reina, who just spoke, the president of one of the factories that has 2,400 workers. It's been really hard for them and their leaders. It's hard for all the workers that they're producing 100% and the next day they say, we're closing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ava, and thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you soon.